And welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 929th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, the Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC and a co-host today for a conversation featuring Sydney Vernon, co-hosted by myself and the Rail's production editor, Tyhe Cooper. We're thrilled to welcome poet Victoria Mbabazi to close today's program. The Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and that here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but they do serve as a reminder of place of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now I'll introduce today's guest and hosts. Artist Sydney Vernon superimposes personal family photographs and folklore with both real and imagined histories, quietly critiquing the global depiction of Black life and bodies. Combining elements of drawing, painting, and collage, Vernon's multi-layered works blend memory and history into new forms, at once imagining a poetic contextualization and a demand for recontextualization, coalescing symbols and ornaments with the spirit of her figures. Vernon earned her BFA at the Cooper Union in New York and lives and works in Prince George's County, Maryland. My co-host today, Tyhe Cooper, is a writer. They're the production editor and poetry events curator at the Brooklyn Rail. And I'm Chloe, a curator working with artists in public spaces and the director of programs at the Rail, where I have the pleasure of delivering this weekday lunchtime conversation series with my colleagues, Carolyn Ferrucci and Eleanor Krishmar. And with that, I am going to start us off and share a few views of your current exhibition at CapCap, Sydney. My first question, this is your second solo exhibition in New York. And at the time that you had your first solo exhibition, you had started to explore these family photographs, and that sort of covered a span of about 40 years in your family history. And you were asked at the time to center one of the mediums that you were working within, or one of the practices that was most important to you. And you really talked about drawing and how central it was to you. And I feel like that's a great access point to hear from you broadly about the show on view at CapCap that really centers drawing at its heart and features so many rich works on paper. So I want to pass it over to you to start us off.
Yeah, I mean, I think at its core, this show is really about vulnerability and grief and moving on from a really tough period in my life, but using drawing as that outlet to just channel all the energy out. And that immediacy of drawing really resonates with me because I've been doing it since I was probably like 2 years old. My mom put a marker and or a crayon in my hand, and I just rolled with it. I still have drawings from when I was 5 years old. You know, I really, really, really love drawing and the different mediums. Like even when I'm painting, it feels like I'm drawing. Pastels, oil pastels are what I would say my medium of choice. I just really love the pigmentation and how quickly you can cover a surface, because like I said, a lot of times this is about just getting an idea out about just that rush of inspiration and subconscious matter coming to the surface.
Totally. Well, first of all, as my first time speaking, I also just want to say thank you, Sydney, so much for joining us today. I'm really thrilled to get to talk about this exhibition. And thanks, Chloe, for talking with us. We wanted to start with this work, which I think is really also interesting to follow on you talking about why you use pastel in that speed. But I wanted to open really kind of specifically on this work with attention to I feel like there's a lot of themes and motifs that are present throughout the show that kind of converge really actively in this specific work. This is New Clock Face that we're looking at. And when we were talking earlier this week, you mentioned the influence of Lamar Jarrell Bruce's How to Go Mad Without Losing Your Mind, which then we took a look at. And you mentioned specifically a moment that appears in the first chapter when Bruce is talking about what they call a mobilization of madness. And I wanted to just read the line you mentioned and the line that precedes it, and then I wanted to kind of hear you talk a little bit about that. So the line or the section is, rather than integrate Black people into the pantheon of capital R reason, or seek a place for them at its hallowed table, I want to interrogate the logics that undergird that pantheon and prop up that table. I'm especially interested in artists who refuse to have a seat, but would rather flip the table and carry their meals outside. So even when you were like, you paraphrased that like almost exactly in our conversation. So it seems like it really comes up in your mind a lot when you're making. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that idea means to you generally as a maker. And then also, I think it can be a really interesting framing to get into the specifics of this piece and then of the show generally. But I'd like to start more broadly and just have you talk a bit about that idea.
Yeah, I mean, in this book specifically, it talks about depressive time. It talks about, sorry, I'm getting text messages. It talks about depressive time. It talks about schizophrenic time. It talks about all these different modalities of time that can come from madness. And it also talks about the connection between like the wake, which is the transatlantic slave trade essentially, and how that can be so maddening. And I was really thinking about a psychological space and this maddening when I was making this piece. As you can see, there's a lot of different motifs. I wanted to include Frederick Douglass because he was at one point in time the most photographed man in the world, and he had to do a lot of different things with respectability politics. He wanted to be respected. He wanted to have dignity. So placing him in New Clock Face felt necessary because I wanted to challenge that. I wanted to reinforce the idea that illustrating fragments of the psyche are what activates humanity, and these gestures can lead to the same thing that he was talking about, what without direct representation. Like, you can make anything you want and still be valued as a human. So I really wanted to create this staircase into the pelvic area, into these generations of walking figures. And it also came from a Paul Thek questionnaire. If you're familiar with Paul Thek, he has a questionnaire that was available to his students. And I took it quite literally. The prompt was create a new clock face. So that's where the idea came from, and I kind of just ran with it.
And there are so many different themes in here that recur throughout the exhibition. I'd love to hear you speak a bit about a few of them. I mean, there are so many for us to look at, but the butterfly, at the bottom, the scissor, the high heel. Tyhe and I also really talked about this stairwell, and I'll let Tyhe sort of jump in and frame that a little bit more. But and also, yeah, the hip bone and the spine, which which really orients the entire clock from the center.
And I mean, I think I'd like, because I do have some questions specifically pertaining to the staircase and the angles. But I wonder if before we get into that, because I can see us getting really sort of sidetracked there. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the like in these details, like the high heel, which this specific shape of high heel recurs a lot, and then yes, the bones and the detailing on the spine, which also kind of forms the shape of the butterfly as well. If you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, as I get older, I really, and I'm not that old, I'm only 27, but I do feel like there's a maturity entering the work and a loss of innocence, like that was very present in some of my earlier works, but I wasn't able to fully express it. So with the staircase leading down, again, I was kind of in some dark places when I was making this work, leading down to like the pelvic region and thinking about reproduction. The chandelier just felt like a guiding light through these dark motifs. And I just wanted to combine them all into this image that represented a different era of time. That's really what the theme of the piece is.
Yeah, and I think, and we'll dive more specifically into time in like just a moment, because there's that is so active and comes up so much in these pieces, not just in the like literal representation of the clock, but in the way that you use the line and the body. But before we move on from New Clock Face, I did want to talk a little bit about, or ask you to talk a little bit about the stairway, in the sense that I was thinking a lot about, when reading this text, about madness and about divergence from psychonormative structures, and the way that sometimes that divergence can look sort of haunting, or there's something at play there, and there's something sort of classically haunting about the angles that are happening in the staircase, in that they're not like quite right, in the way that like in Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, like the walls are not right, and that's the first indicator that something is wrong, right? There's like a classic horror thing going on there. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and the idea of haunting, or if that comes up in this piece for you at all, and maybe it's just a projection from me, I don't know.
I won't say it's entirely a projection, but I will say that I do work with a lot of reference images. And this staircase is particularly one that was constructed by Thomas Day. He was an African American sculptor and carpenter and architect that lived in the 1800s. And I bought a book of his at a flea market and was completely blown away by his craft. So I kind of inserted that into the image. Rather, I wasn't particularly thinking of the madness topic in the staircase itself, but I do feel like this descent and this cornering, this edge of the picture creates a lot of tension and moves you through the rest, so you can create your own narrative.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, I certainly did. And then, yeah, as we move into the other works, I do want to return to the idea of time. And I think if we, yeah, we'll get more into that when we go to the other works that are kind of lined up with this one on the wall. But I think Chloe and I were thinking a lot in your show about reflection and the distortion of reflection, both in Trapped 1 and Trapped 2. And maybe Chloe, you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, we just kept noticing how every time there's a reflection in the show, it's never a one-to-one. There's always a dialogue between the portrait and the reflection on the other side. And I'm curious to hear you speak about that, or about how you're thinking about the reflections within the composition as well as within the thematic framework of the exhibition.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we all have our own interior lives, stuff that we only know about ourselves, and then we have how we're perceived by the outside world. So this reflection in both of the images, I wanted to just have that notion of outside versus inside. I wanted that to be present. So you're not just looking at a reflection, you're looking through something. Or, in this one in particular, the figure on the left is drinking the woman up. And I kind of was thinking about patriarchy and like body politics and about how Black women's bodies have been sexualized and subjugated. And I wanted to just create this different conversation. Like, I'm not going to say it's more subtle, but it is like the way that we have to code switch for the pleasantness of others. And it just sometimes feels overwhelming and like I'm just being consumed. So that was the inspiration for this piece. And also another random reference, the Titan's Goblet is a painting. Are you familiar with it? Yeah, the Titan's Goblet is like this huge, what are those things called? Like a chalice. This huge chalice that exists in the landscape and only a giant could drink from. So I imagine this figure as a giant and the smaller figure is like a mortal.
And before we move on from that, I'm going to ask a simple question, which is, how do you organize your references? Because I think we're noticing even as we start this conversation, there are so many for you. And so how do you go about organizing that in your process?
Oh my God, there's absolutely no organization. It's all up here. It's like if something sticks with me, I have the capacity to memorize what it is and just like ingrain it in my mind. I mean, of course, I have folders I have on my phone and on my computer, but what actually does really help me is I have a monthly Google document that I'll put links to articles I'm reading or pictures that I came across online or that I came across in books. And I guess that is a way of organization, but I never look at them ever again. It's just there. Sketchbooks too. Sketchbooks definitely help. I remember this was a sketch before I made it a fully realized piece.
And well, I'm sure we'll circle back to it, but those sketchbooks, a lot of them are available to see and like page through at the gallery, which I found like really astounding as someone who also keeps a lot of like journals and sketchbooks. I was like, I like felt so hesitant to look through them because even like when I was preparing my notes for this talk and like had certain questions from those sketchbooks that I wanted to ask you, I felt like a real like reservation. I was like, oh, but that's I can't ask about that. But I guess I was going to come up later, but I do really want to hear you talk about the choice to include those. And then we'll talk more about the content of them a bit later.
Yeah, I mean, we have this martini coming up again, and this is one of the sketches that we'll see in a piece later. But just again, another psychological space. I just want to keep it real, like first and foremost. So that's why I included the sketchbooks. I'm like, this is me. This is what my drawings look like before I actually make them. There's usually faces involved. There's usually like heavy eye contact or looking away. I feel like those are my two main modes of like eyes, is they're either a sidelong glance or full contact. And yeah, that's just how I move through the family photographs. I'll often draw them smaller in a sketchbook and see if I really like the composition and what matters most in them by just the things come up, you know? And once they come up, it's hard to let them go. You can't really force anything, and I think it's just effortless that when I'm doodling, like certain motifs arrive, like the butterflies to me a symbol of freedom. And I think that's what I was trying to do while making this show, just like free myself from expectations or boundaries that I once had and really address the the core of my humanity again and all of those multi-layered aspects that come with it.
I think that's the idea of freeing yourself from your own previous boundaries is really interesting, especially I think that really kind of answers a lot of questions about the sketchbooks and about like the vulnerability of including them is like I can really see that as like a freeing yourself from those boundaries, and I think that's really interesting. Yeah. We're back to the triptych. I think well now we can get into our conversations about time, but I think Chloe, if you want to start us off here.
Yeah, well, it's such a great segue from the journals, because one of the things that Tyhe and I talked about relevant to this work and many of the others is the trace, or the draft that sort of exists on the page with the finished portrait. And I wonder if you can speak a bit about that, and also how it relates to your ideas about time, because it sort of shows the work in progress as the work itself, and really also introduces other characters or other stories within the central narrative of some of the drawings as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think since I draw people that exist, for me, drawing from life also fits into that equation. So this is a drawing from life. When you're drawing from life, you got to get it right. You got to make the thumbnail before you start. And that's just something I've learned over time, is that it's better to start in a little corner and figure out the shapes that you're going to be working with, and then move on and kind of trace that line that you made before and just get that muscle memory into the equation. So it's more of a technical thing than a conceptual idea. But it's interesting because I actually made this drawing with my mom. She came to visit a class that I was teaching at the Cooper Union. And another literal time-based element is that we spent an hour on it. So bringing those limitations also helps me sometimes, because you don't want to fuss over it. You just want to get the essence of someone, and that's what I really try to do. I'm not always interested in verisimilitude or the thing looking exactly like the person. I'm interested in the moment.
Yeah, and I think the moment gets very complicated in this work. So that'll open us up onto Fortina. But Tyhe, I know you had a few specific questions about Fortina. Maybe you can take over on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the body and these lines, and also just a note that we can see that high heel again in here. But I was thinking about time and movement, and kind of seeing this sort of as a time lapse, and seeing the way that you interact with the line, and doubling. And I was also wondering, yeah, I guess I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. And also I'm kind of going from looking at New Clock Face as a framework and then coming into this piece, I kind of can see the leg sort of as the arm of a clock as well. So I wonder if you could talk about that a bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this image was based off of Tina Turner, thus the name. And it's this really powerful image of her just thrusting her body. And I believe the photographic term is the exposure or the shutter speed, maybe. It's the shutter speed, definitely. And it's like four different versions of her converging into one photograph. And I really, really resonated with that because I don't think that double consciousness is where my being starts, and double consciousness being Black and being in America. I think sometimes we have several consciousnesses, maybe more than 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. There's so many people within ourselves, and they're just like, in me, I'll speak for myself, wrestling with each other, dancing with each other, trying to form this singular being. And it is interesting that you picked up on it resembling a clock face, because I think that time is key in my work, whether it's the family photographs illustrating a snapshot of reality, or these drawings illustrating a photograph that, through its medium, was able to capture the same ideas that I'm working with.
Yeah, completely. And I think we can really see the detail in these works is so great. And I think that movement just comes across more and more the more you look at it. And it's interesting. I also this connects us also to your wall of those 16 works that are all installed next to each other. And specifically, me and Chloe have been sort of obsessed with Dance with Me 1 and 2, which we've ordered in reverse here, because I'm seeing in this piece, like, I feel like I see a lot of the same kind of, it also does that kind of body as clock. And there's the like really strict positioning here that's also sort of impossible, and then gets kind of, well, I like, because we've ordered it this way, I see it as getting kind of fucked with in Dance with Me 1. But actually, I want to hear you talk about like the time frame between these works and which came first and their connection to each other, so that we can look at them in relation.
Surprisingly, that's why they're named 1 and 2, actually, because this one was first, which really bugs me out in a way, because I'm like, how did I go from the abstracted version to the figurative version? Like, I really think, again, I was like pushing my boundaries and trying to, through shape and form instead of like detailed rendering, get this image out. And then when I think I made Dance with Me 1 like months before I even made this one. And I was like, you know what? I want to spend some more time with this image, because it is almost like a magic trick. The way that their bodies are so strong. I mean, I don't think this was edited, that pose. I think it's just some weird hand situation. But if it was, that's really cool too. Um, so yeah, I wanted to focus on kind of, again, this like curtain call, the posing. I wanted to make it a little bit Art Deco. I was really interested in, like, I still am interested in Erte and some of these other artists that I really admire, Tamara Delimpica. So I wanted to pay homage to that era, and then I just decided to show off a little bit and make the second one.
Yeah, and can you talk to us a little bit too about, I noticed that the pose changes slightly, and we were like back and forth on this arm and hand sort of securing one of the dancers, and then here at their waist. And I'm curious if that's your doing or if that was originally in the source material, or how did that change come about between the two drawings?
I think I was taking a lot more liberties with the first drawing and wasn't, again, not focused on the likeness, but focused on the gesture. And with this one, I was paying really close attention to facial expressions, and I wanted to almost make a double of the reference material with it, which is, I believe it's Judith Jameson, but I'm not exactly sure. They're definitely Alvin Ailey dancers, so I wouldn't put it past them to make these insane compositions. Yeah, I wanted to really measure again the draft. I feel like the first one was the draft for this one, so that I could really see these shapes and realize what it was, more of a 90-degree angle or a straight line rather than this curved situation where the feet become almost like a stiletto again. I should have added heels to this one now that I'm looking at it.
Well, I was almost going to say in Dance With Me too, the posturing of the foot actually almost does do the same shape as the heel, which I think is cool. But also, yeah, on the right, I guess it's the dancer's left foot and the one on the right of where we're looking at. It almost, there's something happening there that's sort of akin to the shape of the heel. But then given that now we understand that this is like a focusing in and really paying attention to the source material, I wonder if you could then talk a little bit more about what was going on in your process as you were abstracting the first version and that doubling of the body, and whether that relates to, like you were saying in Ava, the trying to get it right, or if it's a purposeful doubling. Just if you could talk a bit about that in the first one.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I have a crush on a dancer, so I got obsessed with dancers. It really was just passion. It was wanting to breathe life into this idea and then breathe life into it again, and have this iteration become present in my later works. Like, these shapes were not really intentional. It's almost like I was sleepwalking while making them. I don't remember making them because I was just so focused on getting this person's attention.
I mean, famously, I mean, I feel like having a crush on dancers has been a really large pool of inspiration for art generally. That's why Frank O'Hara wrote Having a Coke with You. You know, where would we be without crushes on dancers?
Yeah, and then we wanted to do a side by side. In an early conversation with you, Sydney, we talked about these works of Dion and Tina, and thinking about your relationship to them and sort of signifying or solidifying a connection to them through the work. And I wonder if you could speak a bit about that feeling and about the process of making these drawings.
Well, I love documentaries, and both of these amazing women have documentaries, one on HBO and one on PBS. And I just love their stories. I love how they persevered. I love how they have been practicing their craft from such a young age, and they never stopped. They're really idols to me. So it felt appropriate to give them space and, again, time spent, and spend some much needed attention on some Black women that I think deserve more flowers.
Yeah, I also, you mentioned when we were talking originally about these works, I think Chloe mentioned it just now too, the idea of portraiture as a way to kind of solidify your own connection to these people. And I found that to be a really interesting thing, because I was wondering whether, because I could see that being in the sense of just for yourself solidifying a moment in time where you were really loving a certain person and loving their work. But then I can also see, especially on this wall that includes a lot of different works, and there's that bird's eye view, which seems to be your eyes as the artist. Maybe I'm wrong, but I was I was wondering if you could talk specifically about that idea of portraiture and time giving as a solidification of your own connection to these people who matter to you.
Yeah, the bird's eye view image is actually the eyes of Foxy Brown. So
Wow. I just saw like the pink makeup and went, oh, Sid.
no, yeah. I mean, I could see how you would think that. But I just want to complexify these people, whether it be through mark making or through imagination. I truly feel that they've added so much to the culture and fabric of society with their contributions in music. I think that's the piece too. It's about the music. It's about like the the songs in Mad Time is what Lamar Jarrell Bruce talks about. And I think they all have such a musical talent that made me want to I guess make them icons in my constellation of drawings here. I definitely wanted this celebrity because I used to want to be famous like 3 years ago, but I don't anymore. And I really respect how they're able to handle their celebrity and still have richly deep interior lives.
Yeah, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the process of making the works on the wall of 16. Um, you know, there's we were talking about it together, and there's this real similar to the journals or to sort of an indication of a daily practice. There's a pace to these. And I'm curious to hear you speak about the process of making them. Were they a series initially, or how did you think about them relative to each other?
Yeah, the watercolors were a series and the drawings are a series. So the watercolors are essentially warm-ups. They're how I get loose in the studio. They're how I get to that immediacy again. They're how I experiment with color and different compositions. One of them, the one at the top left, oh sorry, the second row top left is actually a riff on Francisco Clemente. So another one at the top right is an AI generated image that I used. I think I typed in girl with peacock feathers, and that's what came up. So I'm really using these as experiments. I love Tumblr. A lot of the images I got from Tumblr, and I'm still reblogging to this day. So they really are a mix between a fastidiousness, um, a sprinkle of imagination, and a little bit of stealing.
And do you ever manipulate photographs before you draw them or paint them? I'm curious.
I do. Sometimes I change the saturation. Sometimes I cut people out. Sometimes I make Photoshop collages of what a pattern could look like. So there's a bit of technology involved, but I'm not super savvy with it.
While we're on this wall, this piece specifically, I was thinking about this is called Losing My Voice. Oh, which I just have the window over the captions, but obviously people can see those. But we were thinking about, or I was looking specifically at the eyes in this piece and feeling like they are illustrated sort of in the way that like a children's cartoon would be illustrated. They're very gentle, they're very large, and that posturing is very like kind of like taken aback in almost in a princessy kind of way. And then there's this like sort of very jarring body at the top, and it feels kind of like Little Mermaidy. And I wanted to kind of have you talk a little bit about the creation of this piece and looking specifically about, I don't know, childhood and innocence, and if those things are coming up.
Definitely, again, this theme of loss of innocence. This is Ariel. And I don't know, I just rewatched that movie and also rewatched the 2022 version or the 2023 version of The Little Mermaid, and they just like didn't include any of the scariness in the 2023 version, because the 1995 version had some pretty jarring images, like when her voice was being taken out of her by these claw hands. That was insane. So I think I made this really quickly just to illustrate that horror of losing your voice. And it kind of is psychological as well. I didn't want to how do I put this? I didn't want to become another artist that only does the same thing over and over again. I really wanted to create constellations. I wanted to have like an anti approach to themes, even though they do come up naturally. So throwing the Little Mermaid in here, this is just a personal connection that I have with the movie. And the figure at the top, I think represents Haley Bailey, who played the new version, and how there was so much controversy over a Black woman playing this character. There was so much. And that was literally her voice that got taken from, in a way, and appropriated for commercial gain. So this one's kind of deep, if we're being honest. I really thought about The Little Mermaid a lot, and this idea of fairy tales too, because I listened to this podcast, Back from the Borderline, and it talks about how BPD and fairy tales, like we can learn a lot from them. Like, as an artist, you sacrifice a lot. Ariel sacrificed a lot to get what she wanted. So I think my love for this character and my love for Haley Bailey and my personal experiences kind of just convalesce into this image.
Yeah, I think also the way you were talking about the way they removed a lot of the like fear and violence from the live action is really kind of actually interesting to think about when looking at this piece, because I think about like the kinds of really awful and scary things that get to happen or like are, you know, allowed to happen in the false and like extremely beautified world of a children's cartoon. And I kind of can see a little bit of that here, like that horror being softened into these big eyes and these like the way that this is illustrated, and thinking about how much that would change if this was a little bit more like the texture that we see in New Clock Face or in some of your other pastel works, and how that would really alter that understanding of innocence mixed with this traumatic like losing of the voice. I also, you mentioned fairy tale, and we were thinking a lot about this, and also in the press release for the show, the word folklore is used in connection to your work. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you see as fairy tale, what you see as folklore, and how you see those things coming up in this body of work.
I definitely think there's an image of this green girl chasing a butterfly, um, or the butterfly is like in close proximity to her. There it is. I see this one as folklore, like completely imagined, face imagined, hair imagined. I folklore and imagination are kind of like intertwined in my mind. So I think you can see this little stamp of a butterfly at the bottom. And again, it's about freedom. There's more freedom for me to draw from my imagination than there is to directly copy a photograph. And not that I don't like reinterpreting or recontextualizing photographs, but there is a certain sense of what's the intuition, and I can't, the word is escaping me, but it's similar to intuition, where I just go for what feels good. What felt good is mimicking the colors in the Little Mermaid piece, Losing My Voice. And the way her mouth is slightly open makes me think that she's thinking, because I do that sometimes. I'm like, and the way that this sidelong glance again comes up, I think she has a yearning. I think she's looking to what's ahead or what's next to her. And you can really create your own narrative for this one as well. But also she might be like a garden fairy, which is how that flips in.
Yeah, I also think this piece specifically really, I think, segues us into some questions that Chloe and I had about texturing and pattern in your work, and how that can be sort of related to collage. And in the other piece, we can see those the butterfly stamp and things like that. And then here, we can see a lot of different patterns coming into play that seem to be like pressed onto the painting or painted through another material. And I wanted to hear you talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I'm not like a trained printmaker, but I did take 3 classes. So I have some experience. And I also did a print residency at the Robert Blackburn with EPA. So I learned how to improvise when I don't have access to a shop, like almost like color blocking. I'm pattern blocking to create these different surfaces. And for this piece specifically, probably wasn't the most safe way to use stencils, but for the top area, I spray painted a stencil and then used it like a stamp so that it became more raised than um, debossed. And for the bottom, I used the stencils in the correct way, just to create some distance, some depth, and to contrast the black and white figures.
And before we move away from, well, I mean, we'll continue to see patterns recur in some of the works we're going to look at, but I'm curious how you go about thinking about the interiors of some of these portraits, because I feel like the patterns lay the groundwork for this intimate interior world that we're entering with you, and sort of speak to interior patterns and wallpapers and fabrics. And I'm curious if you think of them that way, or if that's if that's part of how you're thinking about the patterns relative to giving space to these people that you're depicting as well.
Yes, I do get quite literal. Like if something has a pattern on it, I'm gonna choose another pattern to replace it and just keep that continuity of the image going. Or if something is fabric, if something has like a cloth detail, or I think we'll get to the tablecloth in the kitchen table diptych. So you can see that there's this like dotted rectangle situation happening. And I actually changed the orientation of the baby from the sketch because I thought it would be too close together and I wanted to give them some distance because this particular person is deceased. So I wanted to, and my Aunt Donna, that's the name of the piece, Donna Time. I wanted to create this separation between the two instead of having them have this close relationship.
And maybe before we move away from this work, because this work is so beautiful, it's one of the first works that you see when you walk into the gallery space. And one of the things that Tyhe and I talked about and noticed was we were looking at this watercolor in the Wall of 16, and then coming into this work, you sort of see that recur in the clock face. And we're curious about this clock face specifically, if it was added to the work after the fact, and sort of how you brought the clock face into the composition.
It was after the fact. It kind of was a last minute decision because I wanted to complexify the image and really hit home this idea of time. This is a very old picture. So I wanted to make a clock face. I made another new clock face that has branches, which is something that I've been exploring recently. You'll see that come up in the future, these branches, as a way to, I mean, branches get really bendy and they overlap each other. So that's how I felt about the time of this image. Like, I wanted to create some tension in the clock. And I think it almost is like a fairy tale again, like the broken clock. What would it look like if it belonged to, I don't know, like some woodland creature, like almost like it's getting overgrown.
Yeah, and I think it segues us over to these works. It's a duet of works at the kitchen table. And am I right in thinking that maybe these were originally one work and then it was split in two, or were you always working on them as separate pieces that were sort of one understanding?
I was looking at them as separate pieces because I feel like obviously in the first image, kitchen table 1, there's an obfuscated face. I wanted to protect the anonymity of this person because we're no longer really that close. And this piece became 2 pieces in that sense that I didn't want to create this bond. Like, I really feel like the space in between these images on the wall and how they're cornered creates, again, tension, whether you want to read into that or not. For me, it's this sidelong glance and this looking forward, and like which characters make direct eye contact with you. So she felt like she needed to be isolated.
Well, it also gives you this sense of, because they sit on, in the gallery space, they sit on 2 sides of a corner and they're almost like looking at each other in a way. Or if you're looking at them, they sort of each face you. And there is sort of an implication of the viewer in the process of looking at them. Was that intentionally, or were you more thinking about the dialogue between these characters in relative to the composition and to the drawing?
Well, this one is directly from a photo.
Mhm.
So I did use it as most of my reference, other than the color. And I really wanted to stay true to that moment because I see them as like historical
Yeah.
evidence. And I really wanted to get that across. Like, why were they looking at each other like that? I really don't know, but I wanted to capture that moment.
Yeah, I want to dwell here in case Ty has anything else to add, because these are really.
Well, I'm hearing that this work comes from a photograph, and does the other work also come from a photograph, or is this okay?
It was one photograph.
Oh, it's one photograph and you split. I see, I see, I see. Okay. Because then I am thinking about, sorry, I am thinking about this gaze and the cornering and the way the patterns, if Chloe, we could go back to the way the patterns are different on the table. And you can see the blocking here. And I was wondering, and I was wondering this also in relation to Dawn of Time with these patterns and the stencils. I'm wondering if these patterns hold any particular significance as you're making these really personal figurative works, whether these patterns come from something or are derived from something from these periods in your life.
Yeah, I do usually look for patterns that are geometric or floral. That's just something that comes up in past work too. I think the floral represents this element of nature and this kind of like old school way that people used to decorate. And it sets these images in a time again. Like you don't really see floral tablecloths anymore. So you know this picture is probably like 20, 30 years old. And with Donna Time, I think I was more so trying to create depth. I wasn't extremely um, committed to the patterns in the photo. They just weren't interesting enough for me. So I chose similar patterns for that piece. And even for Wedding Chainsaw, I think they just, again, I made these all at the same time, and it was like a whirlwind in my studio. So you'll see, like the way that they're organized in the show is very relative to like how I was feeling at the moment and what time I made them.
Which I think, oh, sorry, Chloe, you can.
Go ahead, Ty.
Well, before we'll move and let the audience ask you some questions in just a little bit. But before we do, I thinking about the time during which you were making these works, I do want to talk a little bit more about your sketchbooks and how these works find roots there, and just looking through, like, this one talks about your Cap show, talks about, like, there's these really kind of funny things that you can find, and I was even talking to Daniel and Sammy in the gallery, and we were kind of finding things in there together that were really like, and I kept leafing through looking for redactions. I was looking to see if there were, I was like looking for torn edges on the pages, because I was saying I know that if I was like displaying a sketchbook, I would be like looking through and I'd be like, okay, nobody can see that. And then what's funny is that if we can go back to the last one, and maybe this was just something that happened, but I thought it was so funny, just even if it's coincidence, that one of the few torn pages I could find was directly facing this one that says, "Don't tell mom."
Yeah, I guess I kept that one secret for myself.
It's good. You got to have at least one.
At least one. But I do feel like vulnerability is not only a big part of the show, I keep reiterating it, but a big part of my life. Like when I'm journaling, it's automatic. And I keep saying that I was going through a really hard time because I was like dealing with trying to be an artist outside of New York, be an artist who recently got diagnosed with like bipolar. I had to move like every 3 months. So I really needed this record to keep me sane and proof that I was like enduring the situation.
Yeah, and in these sketchbooks, like I think that there's something really special about including the really nitty-gritty, like daily life aspects of you as an artist and being a working artist in general. And we see that move come up, and also like there are receipts taped in. Like this is a really like this is a daily both practice of like tracking your working life as an independent working person, and then also of like journaling your emotional states and things like that. And I guess I'm wondering about your relation to journaling and to a daily practice, and then how that connects to the larger and more time stretched practice of your visual work.
Yeah, I mean, I think when Notes from the Woodshed by Jack Whitten came out, I was like, I need to write. I need to document like as much as I can. Because if I keep up this practice for 50 years like Jack Whitten did, then it's gonna be a book. It's gonna be something. And you can make edits to whatever after the fact, but I really just wanted to have a comprehensive diary and have that relationship to myself, even when I didn't have access to like affordable therapy or stuff like that. Like I needed an outlet.
Well, I want to give us a chance, Sydney. Ty and I have really, really, really enjoyed and been so grateful for this opportunity, both to talk to you about this show, but also to see it and to spend so much time with it. And we're incredibly grateful to you for chatting with us about the work and the show. I know I'm getting some notifications here of some audience questions, and I want to make sure we have time to hear from the audience. So I'm going to pass it over to a few folks here. Let's start with Sam Cap. Here you go, Sam.
Apologies. Oh, can everyone hear me okay? I'm sitting right next to my brother and only hearing my audio through his computer. I wanted to ask Sid, we were talking a little bit about it yesterday, but I think just kind of having all of the work in front of me is getting me thinking again about it. But I'm wondering like where you feel, or how you feel about autobiography in your practice. I think I guess the larger question to me is like, do you treat your reference material differently when you're approaching a family photograph versus a sort of historical cultural reference? Do they both feel like autobiography to you? I guess where do you kind of fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, I was recently asked a question, which I think I shared with you, which pieces are autobiographical and which pieces are objective. I think they're definitely a mix of both. The family photos I usually keep an integrity to. Um, I don't far true to I don't stray too far with those because I think they are historical documents and I want to respect them in a way. I'll change things, I'll tweak things, but I won't go crazy. So having this other part of my practice that's more desire based and more sporadic or like comes in waves is really important because it gets to the ideas that tie into the family photographs, these ideas of isolation sometimes, these ideas of connection. So these ideas of time. Time is like the word of the hour today, but it's just true.
Thank you for that question, Sam. We have two really wonderful questions from Alfred Dudley in the audience, and I'm going to ask on Alfred's behalf. The first question, Sydney, is earlier Sydney spoke of experiencing multiple dimensions of personality and feeling with each piece. I found that interesting since when I saw all the work in real life at CapCap, I noticed great deliberation of depth through various additive and subtractive printing, drawing, build-up processes. I'm curious, is the voices, characters, sides of you add layers, and which ones do so? And do any of them subtract layers or patterns?
Can you read the last part again about
Yeah, I'm curious if the voices, characters, sides of you add layers to the works, and which ones do so, and do any of them subtract layers or patterns from the works as well?
Okay, I get it. The subtraction happened mostly in Wedding Chainsaw. I was like doing this weird Gerhard Richter like scraping of the background. I would add paint, add a different color, then scrape it down. And that was really fun. The additive also happens in the kitchen table because I spray painted over it a couple times just to get the pattern really dominant and have some like looseness to it and not have it be so rigid in where the edge of the stencil appeared. So I would say Donna Time was mostly additive though. Getting that embossed feeling to the surface was really important for me.
Wonderful. It's such a great question. That the second part of Alfred's question for you, Sydney, is I know we know grief takes form and manifests through these works. I'm curious, however, where kindness takes form in these works. Where is it brightest in the work? Where is kindness at its most dim?
I think I have a note about that. If you give me 1 second. Because I literally was thinking that. Where does the joy come in? Where does this awareness of being alive and enjoying it come in? I think it just is. I can't even find the note. Sorry, I'm just gonna write. The joy comes in my personal life. The joy comes in from letting it all out. The joy comes in ways you can't see, the invisible ways. It's not necessarily in the work. It's just chained within my body and it'll come back. It's not so much in this body of work. It's more so in my last body of work. And I just was tired of like smiling. I was tired of like literal figures smiling at each other because that's how I felt then. That's how I feel now. And I just wanted to honor that grief process through these works.
Thank you so much for those questions, everyone. And Sydney, thank you so much for talking to me and Tyhe today about the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about the work, and many, many congratulations on the show. And I hope everyone here gets a chance to see it before it closes on November 3rd at CapCap. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome our Poet Laureate of the Day, Victoria Mbabazi, to the stage. Victoria Mbabazi's work can be found in several literary magazines. Chapbook is available with Anstruther Press, and Flip is available with Knife Fork Book. Their full-length collection, The Siren in the 12th House, is coming out in fall 2024 with Palimpsest Press, and their collection of personal essays and poetry, Death to All Darlings, is coming out with Fernwood Publishing in fall 2025. They're currently Canadian in Brooklyn, New York.
Hi, everyone. That was amazing. I've never sat in on something like that before. And Sydney, I love your work and I can't wait to see more. So I'll be reading 4 poems, just 2 from the first book and then 2 from the second book. So the first one is Game Night at the 5th House. Do you want me to put the poison in the wine I'm drinking or in the beer you'll drink later? Are you still mad at me? If an apple dies as a tree falls into an ocean, are you still staying the night? Do you want to leave me? I love party games. Mafia is my favorite. You are good at killing. Loving is better, familiar, and fatal. I am good at knowing the mood of a door when it closes, if the tap is crying, when it doesn't shut all the way off. I am good at engulfing my space. The couch is capable of breathing, and it keeps breaking its legs. I can be good, I promise. I am great at becoming whatever you want me to be. Give me a second, give me time. Let me show you, I promise. I can walk right back into that burning target and remember all the things you wanted from the store. This one is Third House Mind Palace. The ability to remember depends on how you view language. Is it a space or a promise? When you talk, I see teeth falling out of your mouth. I am a master of dream interpretation. In all of mine, you are running. You speak like a door I am passing through. I should not attempt to follow. I know the hallway leads to door, an endless vacation. I am busy. I do not have time. I speak to build a shelf. For a room I spoke into existence. All my words are layered with subtext. I want a foundation. I want a home. I sing, and all the faucets pierce the porcelain with memory. You lie, and you lose all sharpness. I cannot be lied to. I built a home in conversation. Language is a space before it is a way to say, you are leaving. Do you know the door is tangible? That the hallway is not endless if you turn back. Turn back. This one is called Bird's Eye View. The happiest woman on the train is reading Sarah J. Maas. And what I'm really saying is that the happiest woman you'll ever see has chosen to read porn in public. Last week, I got vampire teeth tattooed as a token for you. And what I mean is that we are all slaves to our impulses. I'm looking for enlightenment through self-destruction. My ex-best friend ate dinner at a restaurant named after my ex-girlfriend, and I'm trying to figure out who the true loser is. And I think it could be both of us. I believe in a collective experience. Yesterday, I texted my ex-person that he was selfish because I was feeling selfish. And I tell all my New York besties I want all his days to be terrible. And I don't know if they believe me, but how could a day be good after the last one we were happy? I don't want him to know a bigger peace than the guilt he feels over me. I don't want him to know a greater love than the one he took from me. I want to know God through my own self-centeredness. My 6th grade theology teacher always told me that God was in me. I think it's why my dilators aren't working. Excuse me, are you there, God? I'd like it if all my exorcisms felt like orgasms. I'd like it if everyone who called me the sun remembered they're the world to me, that they're supposed to revolve around me. How dare you find new solar systems to pollute? I have no need for oxygen. How could you leave me after surviving all climate disasters, all catastrophes? You were meant to survive and love me. Please ruin my space. I don't know what to do with all this breath. And this last poem is called Stevie Nicks is Just Right About Everything. I need to stop crying at landslide. I am too Black to be subverting white woman cliches. The car window is too dirty to cry against, and yet I continue to. If I'm going to be a girl boss, I have to try harder to sound less soft when I tell him I don't want him, that it's all fine and that I just want him happy. I have to save crying for the bathroom and stop doing it on the side of the bed he is not sleeping on. If I can devour my feelings in a shoe hole, then why do stilettos feel like a tightrope? I am sick of my pride. Am I not meant to swallow anything other than wine and cum? I can't be powerful in the way a dehumanized Black Mary Sue is. I can't pretend I'm above being heartbroken. Olivia Pope, please forgive me, but I want ice cream, and for him to love me, and to be called baby on purpose. I want an airport chase, even if it ends with the plane crashing. I want whatever happened for this to happen in a way that leads to an aching confession, one that says the following program will air every Sunday at 2 p.m. for at least 5 years on the W Network and 10 on Star Channel. It contains angst, delusion, and subjective happy endings. Viewer discretion is advised, and for him to watch the ending with me. Thank you.
Wow, Victoria, that was amazing.
Thank you.
So much for closing us out today. That was awesome. Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Ty. Thank you to Sam and Daniel from CapCap for their support in preparing for today. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor the Rails NSE program and make daily conversations like this one possible. They also support our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. For 23 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and public events like this one, our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. And if you're free on Monday at a special time of 12:30 p.m. EST, join us for a conversation with Nate Hygas, Matt Tabor, and Gabby Collins Fernandez on the occasion of the exhibition Perpetual Screw at International Objects. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by a member of our team at the Rail. And with that, we're going to do that thing we do where we throw open all the mics and everyone says hello and goodbye as they leave. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank
so,
you.
Thanks,
so
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sydney.
Thanks, Ty. Thanks, Chloe.
Thank you, Victoria, for that killer reading.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Victoria. Great reading.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Yes, go see the show. It's incredible. And look at the sketchbooks.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you so much, Sid.
Everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.